We very much appreciate everybody showing up for this media premiere event for us. What we want to do is we've got some pretty exciting research we want to pass on to all of you. And so we're going to have our panel of experts, I just get to ask the questions, here for approximately 45 minutes. Basically, at the American College, what we've done is this will be our fourth iteration of retirement literacy research, which has basically 38 questions that's done as a quiz, and we'll get into the facts of who takes it and all that. But it's 38 questions that you would want people to know for retirement planning purposes, and they'd be questions like, given a different set of ages, what's probably the ideal age for most people for filing for Social Security, something like that. Or if interest rates go up, do bond prices go up or do they go down? I mean, those are just a couple examples of the kind of things we do. And in the prior three, what we found is that people scored very poorly on this. And the same thing happened in this research this year. In fact, I believe, we have 31%. If you take the whole group, and we'll break it into pieces, but if you take the whole group, they only got 31% of these 38 questions correctly, which is discouraging. So call it financial literacy, you could call it knowledge, you can call it understanding, but whatever it is, we know that these are important pieces of information in order to make smart decisions about their own retirement. So a cynic might say that, look, Americans are, frankly, have poor literacy about a lot of issues. Why is retirement such an important one? But I think it's very important because it affects millions of people and affects their well-being. So think about things like the fact that so few of us have defined benefit contracts anymore, right? It's defined contributions and IRAs, and that means that in accumulating, you have to figure out how to do it yourself. In distribution and decumulating, you have to figure out how to do it. You don't have your employer doing it. Key decisions like Medicare and Social Security, well, those are decisions that have to be made fairly early in retirement, but they stick for the rest of your life. There's this very limited safety net in the United States for if you have a long-term care event. So what do you do if you have that kind of thing? And I find this interesting is that Congress really has tried to improve the retirement system and retirement literacy a lot in the last 4 years with the Secure Act and Secure 2.0. But as you'll see from the research, the needle hasn't changed a bit. So it's at least not working right now. So what we're getting at is people need this kind of information in order to make smart decisions going into retirement, at retirement, and during retirement, and our research tells us Americans aren't there. So I want to get started with asking some questions. We do have some, we think, jaw-dropping findings that we're going to hold till the end, but be ready for that. So let's get going with our esteemed panel of our retirement research panel. And Eric over here. Eric is our director of the Center for Retirement Income. So what we thought we'd do is first go a little bit through the findings, and then we'll come back and tell you a little bit more about the research methodology. So, Eric, what did you find most interesting?
All right, thanks, Steve. Yeah, so as you mentioned, the entire quiz is about 100 questions total. 38 of them are about the actual literacy test itself, which means that there's a fair amount that are about sociodemographics and some of the interesting things that we'll talk about this afternoon. But before the retirement literacy quiz itself, we have a self-assessment question, and it's simply, how knowledgeable would you say you are about retirement income planning? And so it's a 1 to 5 scale. 1 is simply not at all knowledgeable, 5 is extremely knowledgeable. And we were curious about how this related to people's actual scores as kind of a beginner there. What was interesting is people were actually really good at self-assessing their knowledge. So for the people that selected as 1, so not at all knowledgeable, their score was only 18% on the actual literacy exam, so compared to 31 for the average. And those that thought that they were extremely knowledgeable, they got a 45% on the actual literacy exam. So we thought that was interesting. People were actually fairly accurate at their self-assessment. Then the question is like, what impact does that self-assessment have on some of these other topics? So one of them was how much money they had saved for retirement. So the people that were not at all knowledgeable, 73% of them had less than $100,000 saved for retirement, as opposed to those that were extremely knowledgeable. 81% of them had more than 100 grand. So it was kind of an interesting initial take from this, not looking at their actual quiz scores, just how they felt, how much knowledge they had. The other question we had is like, what are they doing to bridge this gap? So some of these people, you know, they believe that they have low knowledge. What are they doing about it? The people that self-assess as having, you know, no experience, no knowledge about retirement income planning, just 8% of them actually used or sought professional help, versus those that felt extremely knowledgeable, at least 56% of them were using an advisor. And so I think from an implications perspective, we were trying to think, what does that all mean? And I think at least one from a research perspective, we were thinking, you know, because people were fairly accurate self-assessors, you might just have to ask one question instead of all 38 like we do. So if you're trying to get to this type of knowledge, maybe you just need to ask, you know, how knowledgeable do you feel? And the other was from like a practical perspective. It seems that we found some evidence of this kind of retirement planning knowledge puzzle, right? The people that felt that they didn't know anything weren't really doing much about it in terms of seeking professional advice.
Okay, so Kaylee, you run our research, and you helped us get through all this. Can you give us, now that we've gotten through some of the results, give us an idea how we got there, and particularly if we could break it down a little bit by demographics, you know, age, race, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Eric, for sharing a little bit about that self-assessment piece. I think it's important to note that, you know, we in this process, as Steve had mentioned, this is the 4th iteration of this study. And what is great is that we get this opportunity to get a snapshot over the course of a decade of this consumer kind of knowledge around retirement income planning. And one of the things I also want to address is the fact that the research that we did was with intention, both from a methodological standpoint, and so that we can look at these results and say that there is some replication in that this is a snapshot of America. So we looked at, we had 3,765 respondents. And in 2020, we had included individuals below the age of 60. And in this iteration, we included individuals who had investable assets below $100,000. And we, as a research team, thought that this was really important because retirement planning is a universal issue. It is not something that only the wealthy have to manage, but it includes everyone from all demographic backgrounds. And so we wanted to make sure that we better understood the individuals who are below kind of the threshold of that $100,000 in investable assets, which we had looked at in previous iterations. The other piece to that is also, I think, when you look at the American college, we are trying to provide education for consumers, especially around the retirement space. And so this is an opportunity to better understand individuals who maybe are not utilizing professional advice as a way to garner information. And so I'll just quickly break this down, and the one size doesn't fit all. We do see trends when it comes to literacy. I want to point out that this is a culmination. This is what we would call the retirement income literacy score. This is the total average score across all domains or areas that we looked at in the study. And so what we can see is age does seem to have some level of impact when it comes to the percentage correct. So as we see that people between the ages of 50 and 54 score on average around 25% versus those in the 70 to 75 where they are closer to 38%. That would suggest to us that as people age and have to make decisions based on retirement planning, where it becomes more urgent, that they become more knowledgeable at that point. We see that educational attainment from traditional formal institutions, people with less than a college education score less than those who have advanced degrees. We see the 25% versus the 40% respectively. We see differences among men and women. Men score at 34% versus women at the average score around 29. And we see that those trends also follow through with asset levels. So when we see that individuals have less than $100,000 in investable assets, they score at the 25% versus those who have 1.5 million plus in investable assets. We also looked at retired versus not retired, and we do see that people who are retired do score higher than those who are not. And again, I think that that gets back at this domain-specific knowledge base. So what we do find through a lot of the research is that individuals, when they have to experience something, so for example, Medicare, people, when they get closer to being Medicare eligible in age, their knowledge score around Medicare increases because it's an experience they have and the knowledge that they need in order to get through that particular transition. So we do see that with several of the scores, but the whole sample population is really based on the United States, and we definitely wanted to make sure that we had a mix between those who are retired and not retired.
And I know another thing you found fascinating is where we end up on healthcare. So why don't you pass some of that on as well?
Yeah, so we asked a question in the survey that asked, how concerned are you with certain aspects of planning for retirement? And the two of the top three happen to be concern for rising healthcare costs, and the other is paying for long-term care. This is particularly important to me as a person and in my personal life. I am at the stage where my father is in his aging years and is in need of long-term care. His activities of daily living are shifting, and guess what? He is part of the large percentage of people who do not have a plan in place, have no insurance, and so I'm the plan. And I'm in the middle of my career, but I am my dad's long-term care plan. There is not another option. He does not have resources. There was no plan in place. And in fact, I don't think my father would have known where to go to get information on long-term care. So what we find is that not only is it my dad, not only is it me, but it is a large percentage of America being concerned about these issues. And so what we also find is that given our respondents, the sample, is that only 1 in 4 have any kind of plan when it comes to long-term care. 1 in 5, only 20% have some kind of policy, whether it's a long-term care policy or a life insurance policy with a long-term care option, to plan for what in reality is inevitable for the majority of us. Only 12% of our respondents said that they were certain they would need some kind of long-term care. Yet 70% need some kind of long-term care. So there is a disconnect between what we think we'll need and what we'll actually need, and the importance of that plan. I had, actually it was my fellow researcher here, Dr. Ludwig, we were talking about this, and he said in general, you put in a long-term care issue and it can really derail most retirement plans, and certainly for families where they're living on the edge of their financial comfort zone, especially when they are no longer employed. And then the last thing I kind of want to talk about with some of those findings is that if an individual has a financial advisor, 34% of those individuals have some kind of long-term care plan or insurance in place.
And isn't it amazing how many people think, it's not a problem, Medicare will take care of my long-term care needs?
What is also interesting is only 1 in 3 say that a family member will do it, when in fact, the majority of long-term care in this country is provided for by a family member.
Family, right. So I understand that the Gen Xers are freaking out. As a boomer, I don't understand what the big deal is, but go ahead and tell us, what's the big deal with the Gen Xers?
Yeah, it used to be when I was talking about people who were on the pathway to retirement, I would say baby boomers are on the pathway to retirement. They're about 10 years out. In fact, that's not the case anymore. It's now Gen Xers that is so depressing to me, that are 10 years away from age 65. Think about where Gen Xers are right now in the Post-Pension Protection Act era. The majority of workers now save in target date funds. It's over 60% the last time they collected the statistics. That means that the majority of workers really have no idea what they're invested in. Many of them have no idea how much they're saving. And in many ways, this is a success, because when they made these decisions on their own, oftentimes they didn't make very good decisions. And in fact, if you look at the data, you see that those who manage their own investments in 401k plans actually perform worse than those who just delegate investments through the use of a target date fund. So target date funds have been a success in the accumulation stage, but it's actually divorced people from having to make decisions about their own retirement. And what ends up happening is that when people start to see the end zone approaching, so once they hit their 50s, they start realizing that they have no idea how much money they've saved, how they've invested, what their options are for generating income in retirement, and they have no idea what sort of risks they're exposed to. There is a tendency in Generation X to be wary of institutions. And I think that actually shows up in the data, because uncertainty about things like Medicare and Social Security are very clear. Also, uncertainty about long-term care is very clear among this generation. I think the distrust of institutions feeds into that. And having to make our own decisions about how to plan for retirement, if you think about it, it is a little bit cruel, isn't it? So we automatically place people into these defined contribution plans. We have them invest in these target date funds. Everything is automated. And then when they get to retirement, we sort of dump, $500,000 in their lap and say, good luck. Figure out what to do with that money after retirement. And I think that we've got to start thinking as a society about, because it's obvious from the data that people are not equipped to make the complex decisions that you need to be able to make to decide when to claim Social Security. A lot of the information that is out there online is not necessarily accurate from the perspective of an academic. I mean, that's part of our job at the college, is to make sure that we are telling people that when they say they can withdraw 8% per year from their savings portfolio, that it's not necessarily such a great idea. But most people are not that knowledgeable on retirement income planning. So part of our job is to educate people about how to make better decisions. But I think there is a general social phenomenon, especially for these generations like the younger baby boom generation and Gen Xers who are approaching retirement, who have been in this sort of soft bubble-wrapped environment of accumulation. Now, what do we do with them once they start decumulating? It's no wonder that they're experiencing anxiety, and that's really showing up in the data. Freaking out.
Okay. Well, Chet, 2 words. We have literacy and we have confidence. And I think I was a little surprised what the data told us about the correlation between the two. So let's break that one down.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the results of that are up there. And I think that when I was looking at this, and my aha moment, as we've been kind of calling these things, we measure retirement income literacy similar to how we in the past have measured financial literacy. And no surprise, it's not great, right? And it's consistently not great. So as a researcher and practitioner, it's kind of like, okay, and so what? We've already talked about that. I think that's comparable to, if we think about it in terms of some of the health metrics that we do. We know as Americans that we're overweight, undersleep, we're not sleeping well enough, we're not eating good, all of those things. And it's the same kind of thing I'm sure the medical profession looks at and says, what do we do, right? Like, this is consistently bad. How can we help shape it? That's kind of how I, as a behavioral / psychosocial evaluative researcher, those are some of the things that I looked at more, were some of those elements. And what we see, I mean, you can see it on the screen there, that as scores, and that's the quintile on the bottom axis there, as they increase, we did see higher level of the predicted probability of there being some concerns, which I'm going to touch on. The bigger point that I was excited about being involved in practice was the role that our professionals in this industry and in this profession that they can provide to kind of mediate and mitigate some of these things. No different than someone that is trying to work on their weight and their health is going to have a nutritionist and someone to help them work out. So some of the elements that I was really curious about when it came to these retirement issues, this is the confidence element here, but we also I specifically looked at some of the retirement concerns that have been mentioned. And of those retirement concerns, the two that kind of had the highest average across the board were Social Security cuts and inflation. Those were two of the bigger ones. And that's something I think we can all agree that even the best financial advisor, best financial planner in the world is not going to be able to bibbidi-bobbidi-boo and wave a magic wand and help someone with. And so rightfully so, maybe, that's a higher level of concern from the consumer with or without advisor. However, when you added an advisor, there was an impact. And those concerns did decrease, in part, I'm sure, because of the preparation and the conversations of how do we anticipate those things. From the psychosocial and behavioral side of it, we used in this survey, we used similar questions that FINRA Foundation does when they're measuring specifically financial anxiety and financial stress as measurements to gauge those. And again, that's kind of those scales are 1 to 7. 1, I don't care, easy breezy. 7, oh my gosh, the world's going to end. Or I'm that anxious, or I'm that stressed about it. And again, we saw pretty much on the average it was out of 1 to 7, anxiety was 4.29 and stress was 3.81. What again I thought was cool was the fact that when we have professionals that as an institution we're charged with training and giving the most relevant information, that dramatically decreased to the tune of 20% on the anxiety side and 25% on the stress side, on the financial stress side. You've heard it, there was a lot of lack of congruence with responses. And they would respond in one manner, but then say something completely different. There's a lot of public available data out there that we as research have used on a regular basis. It's cool to be able to put some together where you can get the right questions that you want to try and measure that behavior. And we had such an instance where we were able to measure things specifically in the terms of the financial markets. And one of the questions was their perception of risk and then their comfort in investing in financial markets. And you would think that there would be some sort of correlation there. And for the broad group, there was. But when you overlaid the fact that there was a financial advisor involved, there's some really cool things that happened when we then asked questions of, in the last 12 months in times of volatility, did you sell stocks? Yes or no? And so that mediating effect of that advisor being able to be that calming voice in those instances, it's no wonder they also said, I wasn't as stressed, I wasn't as anxious about my money because I didn't sell at the wrong time. I didn't make that mistake. So those were some of the things that I think we're excited to keep diving into it. I mean, literally every time we look at this as a group, we start thinking of, oh my gosh, we should look at this and we should look at that element. So.
Okay, well, let's keep going on this issue of advisors. So, and I've been around 3 of the last 4 of these, and this one really had some interesting outcomes relative to advisors. Eric, why don't you give us, your number one aha as far as where an advisor fits into all this?
Sure. So I'll start. I had started as a financial advisor myself in September of 2007. So my first 18 months on the job was during the great financial crisis. And I felt like I spent most of my time just trying to get people to, hang with their portfolio. And so ever since then, it's been kind of a research interest as well. And Chet mentioned this from an anxiety perspective. The other thing that we looked at, so we ran like a kind of a little study within the study on things that research would say should help with this like behavior or, sort of not doing anything with your portfolio. And the 3 main predictors that we looked at were how risky they viewed the market. So keep in mind, we collected this in 2023, and we're asking them about what they did with their portfolio in 2022 when both stocks and bonds were down double digits. So a good opportunity to see, kind of check in, what did you actually do with your portfolio and what predicted that? So the first question was, how risky did you view the market in 2022? We also asked what their stock market outlook was for the next 12 months. And then the final kind of main predictor that we were curious about was whether or not they used an advisor and if that had a role to play. And I'll start with the one that didn't actually matter in this case, was how they viewed the market in terms of risk. It didn't end up being a significant predictor when you controlled for kind of the main socio-demographic, age, gender, those types of things. So I'll get to the next point, which was if you ask people how they viewed their the stock market over the next 12 months, that was a significant predictor, and basically for each level of optimism, that led to another 10% higher likelihood that they didn't do anything with their portfolio. But when it came back to the use of a financial advisor, so those that had an advisor, it was twice as likely to maintain your portfolio during the market volatility of 2022 as opposed to those that did not. So, we often talk about, like, these are the studies that we want to do. We lack the transactional data to see, what they're actually doing. We're kind of relying on them to self-report on this. But at least this was an interesting look at what is the role of an advisor during market volatility. And so there was, kind of from a practical aspect there, we think that, again, if you're trying to, what is the question that you should tell your advisors to ask to sort of identify who these people are? And it seemed like as long as you're having them check in with their client and asking them about how do you view the stock market over the next 12 months? What is your market outlook? That might actually be a significant predictor of what they are going to actually do with their portfolio.
And I know you two really have an exciting piece of information to put on, but I'm going to hold off for a second. I'm going to throw a question out of left field to Michael, only because one thing that occurs to me when we talk about advisors, do we have any kind of a disconnect between what an advisor sees important in the process of retirement planning versus what we're seeing here with what's important to the consumer? And I thought I'd throw that at Michael, because Michael's been around a long time, not as long as I have, but
Yeah. So we did a survey with the Grantham Center, which is also at the American College last year, where we asked consumers, what is the number one thing that would motivate you to hire a professional advisor? So what area do you need the most help? And number one, by far, was understanding how much I can safely spend in retirement. 2-to-1 over helping me manage my investments. And number 3 was putting together some kind of a savings plan for retirement. So number 1 and 3 were retirement related. Number 1 by far is understanding how much I can safely spend in retirement. Now, I don't think a lot of advisors, when they're putting together even an accumulation plan, really focus on this element of helping people understand how much they can safely spend. Now, that's one of the biggest differences, again, between the defined contribution era and the defined benefit era, is that today's worker does not have a very clear idea of how much they can safely spend. And if you look at the knowledge, it's actually the lowest in investment management and in annuities. Annuities is actually the very lowest. So the knowledge on how to build your own pension is lower than in any other topic area. I think that is a problem in general, but I think when it comes from the perspective of an advisor, what we're seeing that people are anxious about are these things like protection, income, and accumulation is I think it was actually the lowest area of concern of all of them, but protection is consistently the highest area of concern. And it's one of those areas I think these surveys like this can give us insight into what the average consumer is actually thinking. I think a lot of people who use professional financial advisors are perhaps not as concerned about some of those areas. A, because the advisor can help them protect against it. B, because it won't have such a devastating impact on them as it will for, say, the average mass affluent sort of retiree. For them, the anxiety is mainly about protection.
Well, we'll get to your questions here in just a moment, but one other observation I'd make, if you slice the data, it's my 2 ahas. Number 1 is, before, what we did is we asked people to self-report if they had more than $100,000 investable assets. On this one, we went ahead and included those with less than $100,000 investable assets, and as Kaylee said, it's pretty, I don't know if you want to call it surprising, but it's pretty discouraging that the people with less than $100,000 in investable assets did so poorly on the quiz. So both they don't have the money and they don't know what to do with the money they have. That was one. The other one that was Kaylee's observation, and I guess I could just say from self-experience, is notice how much better the older folks did on literacy than the younger folks, and part of it is just because of experiential. So why would somebody in their 50s know that much about Medicare and Social Security? Why would somebody my age know about it? Because I had to. And so it's an interesting process and progress that you see with the two. Now, there's another interesting thing going on here, and I know you two have been wanting to tell about this, but think about the fact that this has been going on for a decade. And a decade ago, yeah, we had computers, but they weren't doing the same things they are right now. And if we said to you advisor, you would think about somebody in a nice business suit, and the client would go to the advisor's office and they talk about whatever they're going to talk about. But nowadays we have AI and we have all these things going on. And so when I say advisor, are we talking about a DNA-based advisor, or are we talking about a digital one in the form of AI? And I believe that you did a little experimentation with that.
We did. We did. And Eric and I think we've talked to many of you in this room actually about AI, specifically generative AI and the implications of it in our profession. We've worked with Azish, our director of our Center of Ethics, on the ethical implications of it, and done a lot of content internally and speaking externally about it. So, rightfully so, we might as well see how it did, right? So this ChatGPT is specifically the platform that we used on this test, and we ran a control experiment state first. How many of us would agree that if ChatGPT can pass the bar, medical board exams, CFA exams, all of the objective information, we would expect it, with all of the resources it has, to get 90+%? Yeah, some hands, yeah, okay. It got 45. It got 45% when we gave it the same questions. And we literally, this was like last week that we were preparing for something else, and it just dawned on us, we should ask ChatGPT what it thinks about these questions. And so we wrote the script, and I'll let Eric kind of talk about the next component of that, and maybe we can discuss a little bit out loud, really, because we're still kind of nibbling on this thing of what does that mean. But what did you do, Eric?
So we're updating RICP content. We're thinking about it a lot right now, and we actually, as we're rebuilding RICP, a really cool thing that we're adding to it. So RICP, by the way, is the Retirement Income Certified Professional designation. It's for those that want to specialize in retirement income planning. One of the cool tools, because of AI and its prevalence right now, we're trying to think of ways that you could add AI to the course itself to help a student as they're going through it, have them ask questions, hey, I want to learn more about these distribution strategies, right? So we want to make sure that the AI actually has the knowledge that we think it does to answer the questions. And so when we ran the literacy test through it and we found that it failed it, that was a big question mark, oh, maybe we can't actually do that. So the next iteration was okay, well, we have content material, 3 textbooks of RICP, and we thought, well, what if we sort of gave it this information and so trained it on RICP's knowledge, and then had it retake the test. And there's a term in AI called prompt engineering. So there's a sort of a way that you have to tell the AI what to reference first. So we told it, hey, make sure when you take the literacy exam, reference the RICP knowledge first before sort of going out to your normal database, and then take the test. So out of curiosity, we did it failed it. Do you think it did better, worse? Better, yeah. So it only got one wrong. So it got a 97% after we trained it with the knowledge. And by the way, if you're curious what the actual question was that it got wrong, it was something along the lines of a 65-year-old male. What is the percent payout on an annuity? And the first answer was 3 to 6%. The next one was 7 to 9, whatever. And it chose 3 to 6%. We were actually talking about this as a group earlier today, and we thought, well, maybe that was correct sort of in its knowledge base as of low interest rate time. So maybe it was just an update thing that made it get wrong. But other than that, we thought that was pretty interesting for.
And go ahead.
Well, I just think I've been nibbling on like, so what does that mean? What does that mean? Were our questions bad? Is the internet bad? Like, what's going on with this that this would be so disparate, right? And I think it's, yes, question mark? I mean, it's kind of a situation where if this thing that has access to all the information that our consumers do, right? The people that answered this quiz also have the exact same availability of information that's out there. I think the fact that we can look at it and say, well, it passes other objective, knowledge-based questions and quizzes and tests and CPA exams and everything else, what does that say about our profession? I think the first thing it says is we're probably not getting replaced as a profession by it anytime soon, because at the end of the day, that human element, the seeing through the subjective response of the rightness of an answer is contingent on the human being. It's contingent on the DNA respondents that answered our quiz questions. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't think it's going to like take over the world anytime soon or anything. I'm still like saying please and thank you when I ask it questions, because just in case. But I think that that's more telling of the fact that as a profession, we do need to do better. Because if I want to go get better health and eat better and everything else, I can go out to the internet and I can look everything up without getting a personal trainer. And it's probably pretty, there's subjectivity to that as well. But in our profession and how we communicate with our consumer, we need to give them the right information at the right time. Whether that's as professionals in the industry or as providers of knowledge to the consumers that might not otherwise seek a professional.
Yeah, I think what is different about retirement as opposed to some of these other knowledge areas, and I think one of the big differences, there is not this big established credible body of knowledge on what objectively the right practice is. Now, when it took the RICP, it got it right because we're familiar with that body of knowledge, but I don't think that body of knowledge has spread far enough. And I think that a lot of supposedly authoritative voices in this area are giving out information that is wrong. And I think that's part of our job as academics, is to confront it when we see it. But it's also part of the job of a journalist, a financial journalist, is when someone says something that is objectively wrong, we've got to start calling them on it and at least understanding what is objectively right. And the examples I'm thinking of are like that what is a safe withdrawal rate from an investment portfolio. If somebody who is very authoritative comes out and says something that is objectively wrong, it's our job to push it. And Social Security claiming, that's another great example where there is an academic consensus on delayed claiming. It is generally to prefer more delayed claiming rather than early claiming. However, there are a lot of authoritative voices out there that encourage people to claim Social Security early. These are examples where if you just scrolled the internet, and I see this confusion among a lot of retirees that say that they're doing research and the information that they're gathering is not the best information. So our ability at the college to be able to filter this information, I think, is incredibly important. But I think we're still, this is a problem between financial planning as a profession and other types of professions, is that we should base our recommendations on what is objectively optimal, and sometimes that doesn't necessarily happen.
And I'll leave you with one thought before we go to questions. The other thing we've learned from this so much is one size does not fit all. So John, I remember you just yesterday morning had a place where the Social Security claiming might make more sense earlier. So we have to realize we have to work with clients in their individual capacity, not just at the macro level. But that's our opinion. We were getting together this morning. We are all excited because there's still slicing and dicing we need to do of the data. So thank you, and let's break.